The Spinoff Podcast Network.
This is Kiwi is back for a brand new season with more inspiring kōrero from special guests including rugby player, father and role model TJ Perenara.
My family bring me joy. Rugby brings me joy too, but it's not the same joy as my family brings me.
And global dancer and choreographer Kirsten Dodgen.
For some reason, people think I'm very intimidating.
Listen to the new season of This is Kiwi, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in collaboration with KiwiBank. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Talo for Lover. I'm Madeleine Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Despite gluten intolerance, it seems like we are eating more and more flour for most people.
Talo for Lover. I'm Madeleine Chapman, editor of The Spinoff. Welcome to Behind the Story, where I go behind the scenes of a big article on the Spinoff from the week. The Spinoff has always said it's an online magazine, and if it were a weekly print mag, these stories would be on the cover. If you want a weekly rundown of some of the best reads from the Spinoff every Saturday, make sure you sign up to the weekend newsletter. Today I'm talking to Shanti Mathias about her data journalism piece headlined 7 Graphs That Show Where New Zealand's Food Comes From and Where It Goes. And it pretty much does what it says on the tin. Shanti gathered a bunch of import and export data on our most common food items like rice, wheat and bananas to see where exactly we're getting our food from and where we're sending the stuff that we grow here. Some of the results are surprising, and I found myself weirdly curious about our history of wheat. Here's Shanti Mathias on Behind the Story. Hello, Shanti.
Kia ora, Mad.
This was a very specifically Shanti story, which I think anyone who has read your work will probably be familiar with what a Shanti story is, but it's basically diving particularly deep on something and looking at it in a way that most people, myself included, probably would never think to. So what made you, look at our rice and our wheat and our bananas and go, I need to find out where exactly in the world those came from?
I think the seed of this was actually last year when I wrote a story about mangoes and where the mangoes come from, and I requested some data about where our mangoes come from for that, which was really interesting. And that was just when I was just starting to learn how to use spreadsheets to make graphs. And actually, please don't look at the graphs in those because they're very ugly. But that it just sort of sat in the kind of back of my head all year of like, oh, there's heaps of data about where our food comes from. And then when we started the What's Eating Aotearoa project, that was something that I thought was a bit of a no-brainer of really cool to look at all the food that we grow in this country, but also how dependent we are on food that comes from other parts of the world. So I was like, okay, well, just how much is that? Like, how do you actually visualize it? How do you picture it?
And I think, when people, if you Googled, where does our rice come from? Now there'll be an answer. There'll be a Spinoff article that shows it exactly with some lovely graphs. But obviously it wasn't as simple as Googling where does our rice come from. How did you actually get and gather all the data?
So I'm sure that if I describe this process, someone will tell me that there was an easier way. But the way that I did it is there's these data sets that Statistics New Zealand releases, which are called Overseas Merchandise Trade, which is like every single thing that comes into the country and out of the country, how much it was worth, where it came from, which port it entered or which airport it entered, how much it weighed. All of that information is there. It's separated into, if you want to see which port it entered, every single month is separated. So every single month of the year is different. And each of these spreadsheets has got 14,000 lines or something, because there's so many different things coming in from horses to through red horses to our wheat to our sugar to spare parts for cars or whatever. So absurd amount of data. And so I got every single one of these spreadsheets for just the last year, 2023, and downloaded them. So it's all publicly available. I didn't have to do an OIA or anything. But then for a couple of the data sources were a bit different, but most of them were from this initial set of information from 2023, and a few I did more over time. And basically, I would search something like, they're all categorized like brown rice that's broken, brown rice that's whole. It's sort of, there's all these like slightly niche categories, which I guess is just how they put them into rows. And so I'd search rice, figure out all the rice categories, and then I'd exclude like rice flour or like rice syrup or whatever. And so decided which ones I counted and which one I didn't, and then copied that to another spreadsheet. I have this like very ugly master document with like sort of 17 different tabs of like the stages that I went through, which usually end up being like a couple of 100 lines of however many lots of rice were imported, for example, and then would separate it out, filter it out by country, and then just kind of combine all the numbers, because I thought it wasn't that relevant how much came in January versus July. I was just like, what's the total amount? And then I spent a lot of time just trying to make it look nice and legible in a map, and trying to find like different interesting insights by picking a couple of like rice and wheat, really basic, bananas, really basic, and then looking at some of the stuff we export, because the stuff that we send offshore is kind of in conversation with the stuff that we bring into the country.
I mean, that sounds exhausting to me. I guess a even more basic question is, how did you get the data? Like, who did you have to request that from?
So this is all publicly available from Statistics New Zealand, this stuff, except for the wheat information, which I just requested for them to send through because I wanted that compiled through time, and they don't have it going back all the way to when I wanted it. So that was really helpful. So yeah, there was quite a lot of I did get some help from the Stats New Zealand team, but this information, mostly it is publicly available, and it really made me think about how much information there is out there that you can access, but it's just in these like completely illegible formats that makes it really hard to understand what it is and what it means.
And what surprised you? I mean, sometimes when journalists start a story, you kind of know where it's going to end. You know, you go, I want to write about this because I know this to be true, and so now I'm going to fill in the gaps to tell why this XYZ is a thing. Other times you go, I have no idea what the answer is, I'm just going to request the information or have a look and then see where the story goes. Was there anything in the data that you went, oh, this is not what I expected to see, I thought I was going to tell this tale, and actually now it's a bit different?
I think the rice really surprised me. I think I had just sort of automatically assumed that, I guess, two of the biggest countries, which are also big rice eating cultures, so India and China would be the top of the rice table, but Thailand and Australia are actually our biggest sources of rice, at least last year. And that was really interesting to me. I mean, obviously those countries also grow rice, but I think especially people don't really associate Australia with rice growing and rice exporting. And in general, throughout this, it really, like, Australia is our biggest source of wheat, it's our biggest source of sugar, biggest source or second biggest source of rice. So it really emphasised to me how much of some of these really basic things we eat every day come from Australia. And if I'd had more time, I might have made a graph showing like just Australian imports, but it's just another one for another project some other day.
I'm quite interested. One of the 7 graphs, one of them was wheat. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we historically have grown a lot of wheat here, but you kind of noted that we import a lot of the wheat that humans eat, and most of our wheat is just used as feed for animals. Can you talk a little bit about this kind of strange thing of growing a bunch of something but then not actually eating it in New Zealand and then importing from elsewhere? It just seems like kind of a strange roundabout way to be processing.
Yeah, we only started importing wheat really in the mid-1990s. So before that, we basically, you know, in terms of kind of recent, like last century of New Zealand history, there were heaps of flour mills around. Most people were eating wheat that had been milled in this country. And so now we still have some of those mills that grind it into flour, but it's mostly imported wheat. There's probably a whole thing on wheat separately, but there's a lot of people who say that New Zealand's climate is really good for growing wheat. The land is really productive here growing wheat, but kind of because of the economic conditions, it often means that it seems like farmers are growing less wheat, or if they are, they just sell it like quite cheaply for animal feed to be feeding, I would assume, like cows and pigs and stuff. but I don't actually know that for sure. And then the sort of other kinds are imported, and so there's probably a whole history of why that is. But it just seemed particularly striking that this is something which has really changed, of us becoming really dependent, particularly in Australia, for wheat, which is a really basic, like, if you average it out over the year, like kind of every New Zealander eats like many kilograms of flour a year, which is kind of a funny image. But that really surprised me. Because I knew that we imported wheat, but I hadn't realised that how much we could grow here if we wanted. But it seems like maybe partially because of the dairy industry, which I also showed how much milk we're exporting, it seems that land is just more lucratively used for putting lots of fertiliser on grass to feed cows to make milk. So interesting to see the economics of that there.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting as people talk about kind of trying to move to more sustainable ways of using the land, whether wheat sort of makes a comeback at some point in the future.
Yeah, it's sort of, despite gluten intolerance, it seems like we are eating more and more flour for most people. So, it seems like there could be lots of capacity to change that in the future.
And there were actually, the headline says 7 graphs that show where New Zealand's food comes from. There were actually 8 in the original draft. You probably could have made 100 graphs of where New Zealand's food comes from. But one had to be taken out in the editing process. And can you sort of talk about the reason for that? I think there was a bit of a discussion because since people have read it, people have mentioned this product and said, it would have been good to see where this came from.
So the last graph was about coffee, and I was comparing how much unroasted coffee versus roasted coffee we import. And to be honest, there's something which I still haven't got into the bottom of. It's basically about how the spreadsheet is categorized so I'd excluded like coffee flavored milk and, other products which had coffee essence or something. But I hadn't realized that they had also excluded the instant coffee category. And so I just wasn't seeing it as I collected the data. And it was still quite striking. Like, I think on average, it's something like per New Zealander, it's about 10 kilograms of coffee is imported like in whole bean form, either roasted or unroasted each year. And it was sort of showing how much coffee ends up being roasted and processed here. And then some of that would probably be sent overseas with New Zealand's like kind of premium coffee brands. Because I had included instant coffee, and then we sort of just looked and we were like, wait a second, most coffee that is drunk here is instant coffee. And so the instant coffee had not been in my initial data set. So I was like, okay, well, talk to Alice and another Spinoff editor. And we were like, okay, well, we can't really put the coffee graph and if it doesn't include the way that most people drink coffee. So that's a bit of a shame. But the kind of also thing is that means that it was showing where the coffee was processed, not where it was grown. So it was also kind of a little bit separate from where the coffee actually came from if you're looking at instant coffee. So there's just these kind of like several layers of complexity. And I think I was mostly more interested in like raw products as well. So that's just how it worked out.
Maybe in the future there will be a wheat deep dive and a coffee.
It could very well be.
I want to sort of end on something that also came out this week that is probably at the other end of the spectrum in terms of Spinoff articles, which was the Spinoff Power List, 50 New Zealanders you need to know. I think a fair few readers read that list. It was under the Spinoff byline, but I do think probably a lot of people assumed that I had written it, which I did write some of it. But it was actually a genuine group effort. Everyone in the office was invited to nominate who they thought should be on the list and why. There was no criteria. It was just you put in who you want. And I particularly liked your nominations. Can you talk to, I'm going to specify the woman on New North Road and Isaiah. Can you just talk a bit about these great New Zealanders?
Last year I spent a week, did a little stunt article, spent a week living on New North Road without leaving the street. And during that time, because my flat was there at the time as well, there was just someone who I saw all the time, like almost basically every single morning. It seemed like we were basically on the same commuting schedule. I'd see her in the morning and I'd see her in the evening, and she'd always just pass me on her bike, just like a very like strong, like determined woman with a good like backpack and a very like determined expression. At least this is my interpretation of this stalwart New Zealander. And I just really like just imagining like as she like sort of cycled past me as I was biking to work, just being like, I wonder where she's off to. I wonder what her day holds. I wonder what kind of great and magnificent things she's accomplishing. And I still see her like I would say at least once a week. I still feel like we're kind of on the same. I don't commute the exact same route anymore, but I still see her pretty frequently. I don't know if she recognizes me, but I just see her. I think I know who you are, even though I don't. And then my other nomination was Isaiah, who's our colleague here. He's a video editor, and we have a running club at the Spinoff. We go running once a week, and he is like the ultimate hype man. Gets everyone really hyped up. But everyone was really proud of him last week because he was the member of the month at the local gym, and I just thought that's a really great accomplishment. It deserves to be celebrated on our great list.
I do think that is. I think that's kind of the fun part of our week. Usually is you're working, you're deep in the spreadsheets on one side, and then you kind of chucking in a little ode to a stranger on New North Road. Take a little break from your coffee beans to salute some fellow New Zealanders.
The duality of man.
On that note, I'll let you get back to your spreadsheets, but Shanti's article, 7 graphs that show where New Zealand's food comes from and where it goes, can be read in full on thespinoff.co.nz right now. Thank you very much for being here, Shanti.
Thanks, Mad.
That was Behind the Story. We'll be back next week with another Spinoff writer and another great yarn. Thanks for listening.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire, here to urge you to tune in to Gone by Lunchtime, a podcast with me, Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas, tackling the world of New Zealand politics, from policy to polling, from scandal to psychodrama. Listen to Gone by Lunchtime, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network, wherever good pods are sold.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.